GameSci.com. GameSci.com.
Heidi ho, neighbors! Welcome to a Python program. This Python program is composed of three parts. It has variables, memory that holds values. Here are variables over here. It has functions, code that does not run until called. I put the S in parentheses here because there's only one function in this example. A good Python program will have multiple functions. And starter code, code that runs when the program is first executed. When you say run my program, this is the code that executes. Variables. A variable is a location in computer memory where we can store and retrieve values. I set up two variables here, age and name. Variables hold values and will store those values in these locations in computer memory. Functions. A function is executable code we can call to perform a task. I put the S in parentheses here because we only have one function in this example. A good Python program will have many functions. This function is called main, and it will not execute until main is called. Starter code. This is executed automatically when the program is run. It includes a call to the function, so it will run also. These two lines of code here will execute on startup. When you say run my Python program, this is the code that will execute. Let's run our Python program. Python starts executing at the first line. Variables are usually at the top because we have to create them before we can use them. So I'm going to set up an age variable and assign it the value 19. This is an integer value 19 for the age variable, and if you follow the line, you can see the value representing 19 is stored in the variable. Now everything in a computer is binary ones and zeros, so what's really being stored here is the binary representation of 19. Name equals X. Variables are usually at the top because we have to create them before we can use them. Let's assign the string or str value X to the name variable. To be honest with you, X is just a placeholder. You have to assign something to create a variable, so I decided to put X in there just temporarily, and there's the X showing up in the name variable. Once again, this is computer memory, and variable stored values, these are the initial values I've decided to store in my variables. Notice how it jumped over the function. Functions do not run until they are called. And it so happens this is a call to the function main. So it'll jump back and execute the function in main. So when I ran this program and it started with these two lines, then it jumped over the function to execute this line. This is the call to the function main, which will jump back up and execute main. The global command says to use the global variable outside the function. Without it, the function would treat name as a local variable created inside the function. This is saying I'd like to use that variable that I created up here at the top. Without this line of code, it would create a new variable, and we don't want that. How do we know this is the code inside main? Indentation. All these three lines right here are inside of the main function because they are indented below the main function. As soon as the indentation stops, main stops. Python is very, very strict on its indentation. Where a line of code is indented says a lot about where and when it will execute. Next, output a prompt to ask the user to enter their character name. And you can see the print command goes to the output and outputs here. All the code intended in main will execute. We are in the middle of the call to main, and everything that's indented here will execute. Get input from the keyboard, assign it to the global variable name. Ask for keyboard input. Wait till someone types in a string, and they did. They hit the enter key, it will be assigned to the name variable, and you can see what they entered on the keyboard shows up in the name variable. That's what variables do. They store values for us so we can later retrieve them. This line marks the end of main. Now, how do I know it's the end of main? Because the indentation is done. We'll return to the code after the call to main. What happens when you reach the end of the main? It will jump back to after the call to main and pick up executing of the program. Output a message with the player character name and their age. This is the final line executed by this program. Print the word player. Now, when it's in quotes, you will see the actual word player show up. Then print the variable name. Now, notice this is outside of quotes. Since it's outside of quotes, we'll get the contents of the variable name, and Frodo shows up on the output. Once again, we're back to being inside of quotes. When we're inside of quotes, we mean literally the letters IS need to show up on the output, and there they do. Then we're outside of quotes again. I want the contents of the variable age to print. So there's the 19 in the variable age, and the 19 shows up on the output. Are you getting the point on how important the quotes are? If something's in quotes, we want these literal letters. If something's outside of quotes, we want the contents of the variable. That wraps up our first Python program. That was pretty simple, wasn't it? Python is a very direct and straightforward language. One of the things I like best about it is it's not cluttered with a lot of extra syntax. Other programming languages like Java and C++, they have a whole bunch of curly braces and semicolons that Python just said, not going to do it. What did Python replace them with? Indentation. The indentation is extremely important when it comes to a Python program. Make sure that you indent, and that's what takes the place of all those extra characters. On we go. Python is easy. It is a real simple language. To show you how easy Python is, let's start with the easiest game I know. Guess a number between 1 and 10. Indent, indent, indent. Python insists on perfect indentation. It groups codes based on indentation. Indent determines when and if code executes. An extra space here or there is not allowed in Python. I drew this vertical line here to show you that this line and this line and this line and this line and even this line down here are all indented to the same amount. That is significant to Python. If it's not indented to the same amount, it is not part of the group. Indentation is important. Python is very consistent. This indented code forms a block of code. The code is part of the while statement, and the block ends when the indentation ends. Again, I drew the vertical line to show you that all of this code on the other side of the vertical line is indented to the same amount or a little bit more. This means this forms a block of code. This block of code is attached to the line above it, this while loop right here. Indent. The code in the block is always tied to the statement above the indentation that ends with a colon. Now see that colon right here? After every colon, you'll notice that Python gets indented. And whatever's indented, whether it's 1 line of code or 6 lines of code, this line that's indented is tied to this if statement right there. This is the block that will execute if this is true. Indent. The code in the block is always tied to the statement above the indentation that ends with a colon. Again, this is a very small block. It is 1 line of code that will execute when this if statement is true. You'll notice there's a pattern here. Everywhere you see a colon, there is an indented block. Everywhere you see a colon, there's an indented block. Everywhere you see a colon, there is an indented block after the colon. It is very important to indent your Python code properly. If it's in the indented block, it's part of a group. If it's outside the indentation, it means the group is done. It's over. Bad indent. Ooh. Only indent after a colon. It's pretty easy if you do not indent correctly. The error message is clear and a red squiggly line usually appears to show you the bad indent. This is poorly indented. It should be indented the same amount as the code above and below it. Python will call you out. This program will not run. It'll stop and say you have to fix this indentation. And that's what I like about Python. It is very clear when you get the indentation wrong. It makes you go back and fix the indentation. An extra space here or 1 less space there, all of them Python will not allow. Python wants good indentation on all the lines of code. Once you understand indent, the code is easy. The game would not be much fun if the answer was listed, so let's proceed without knowing the answer of the game. We'll just create a couple of variables with initial values, and again, I'll kind of hide the value of number for now, and we'll find it at the end of the game. Guess is set to 0, and you can see a 0 showed up in my variable guess. I'm not showing the value of number because, well, that's the whole point of the game, is to guess the number. Our first executable line of code, print, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10, and there you can see it up in the output. The print statement will output text to the screen, and that's the start of the game, informing the user what they need to do, guess the number from 1 to 10. While number is not equal to guess, this currently is a true statement. While the value in the variable number is not equal to guess, meaning number is not 0, this is true. That means execute the block of code indented below. False would skip the indented code. True says execute all the code in this block. So when this is true, I will execute this code right there. While the number not equal to guess is a true statement, so we go inside the block and execute the indented code. Are you seeing the importance of indentation? When it decides to execute the code, it will execute the indented block of code. Ask the user to input a guess and convert it to an integer, store the result in the variable guess, and you can see a 5 showed up. So we output to the screen, enter a guess, and it showed up here. The user typed in a 5 and hit the enter key. That 5 got converted to an integer and assigned to the variable guess, and there it shows up in the variable guess. We're storing a 5 in the variable guess. If number greater than 5, which is the value of guess, that is a true statement. I know what's in the variable number, and I'm telling you that your guess needs to be higher. When this statement is true, we will execute the indented code. Since it is a true statement, we will print the word higher. Tell the player the secret number is larger than 5. Once again, the statement above evaluated to true. When this statement is true, the indented code executes. And there's the word higher showing up on the screen. Is number less than 5, which is the value in the variable guess? This is a false statement. When this statement is false, we skip the indented code. Remember, when it was true up here, we executed the print statement. When it's a false statement, number less than guess, we skip the print statement. The indentation is very important here. When something is true, we go inside the indented code and execute it. When something is false, we skip the indented code. End of the while loop. Go back up and execute it again. How do I know this is the end of the while loop? Because the indentation stopped. Remember, it's all about the indent. All this code that's indented on this line is part of the while loop. When we reach the end of the indentation, which we clearly have, because that's not indented, that is the end of the while loop. So this line here doesn't technically execute. What it does is say, well, when I'm done with this indented code, the while loop says go back up and execute the while loop again. And this code will jump back up and execute the while loop again. While number is not equal to guess. That is a true statement. We have not made the guess correctly. So while it's not equal to guess, if that's a true statement, we will go inside and execute the code that's indented inside the while loop. And once again, that indented code has to be on this line right here. When this statement is true, we execute the indented code. What happens if this statement was false? We would skip past the indented code. So the statement above was absolutely true, so we are jumping inside the while loop and executing the indented code. Ask the user to input a guess, convert it to an integer, and store the result back into the variable guess. The text enter a guess is in double quotes, so enter a guess shows up here on the output. The user input a 7 and hit the enter key. When they hit the enter key, it sent the data back, converted it to the integer 7, and stored the result in the variable guess. And you can see guess now contains the value 7. If number is greater than guess, turns out this is a false statement. number greater than 7 is false. What happens when something is false? When this is false, we skip the indented code, and that's it. Nothing happens. Is number less than 7? 7 is the value in the variable guess. This is a true statement. Well, what happens when the statement is true? We execute the indented code. When this statement is true, we will execute the indented code. See how important the indentation is? Python is all about the indentation. Once you get the indentation right, the program will run right. When true, execute the indented code. False would skip this code. And sure enough, the word lower shows up. Tell the player the secret number is smaller than 7. So we had a guess of 5, and we were told we need to guess higher. We had a guess of 7, and we were told we need to guess lower. Seems pretty easy to me. This is the end of the while loop. This line here technically is not an executable line of code. It's the end of the while loop. Why or how do I know it's the end? Because the indentation stopped. As soon as the indentation stops, the code stops. That's the end of the block. And per a while loop, we're going to go back up and execute the code again. While number is not equal to guess is a true statement. Number, whatever it is, does not match 7, which is in the variable guess. So we have to go inside and execute this code one more time. As a true statement, execute the block of indented code below. If it was false, we'd skip the indented code. But it's true, so we will execute the indented code. While the number is not equal to guess was a true statement, so we're jumping inside the indented block and executing all the code in the indented block. Ask the user to input a guess and convert it to an integer. Store the result in the variable guess. So there's our enter a guess showing up on the screen. The user input a 6 and hit the enter key. When they hit the enter key, it was sent back, converted to an integer, and stored in the variable guess, and a 6 showed up in the variable guess. Feeling pretty good about that guess. Number greater than guess is a false statement. As a false statement, we will skip the indented code. Is number less than guess? That is also a false statement. Our secret number less than guess is a false statement. As a false statement, it will skip the indented code. Once again, we've reached the end of the loop. This line here marks the end of the while loop. Why is it the end? Because the indentation stops. As soon as the indent stops, we are at the end. When it reaches the end, a while loop will go back up and execute again. While number not equal to guess is now a false statement. Number not equal to guess is a false statement. Well, what happens when something is false? When something is false, we skip the block of indented code. This is a match. The game is won. It's done. How does it know how much to skip? It's the indentation. It's always about the indentation. When this statement goes false, it skips the indented code and will come down to this print statement after the indentation stops. Print you got it, and you got it shows up on the screen. And it prints out your last guess just for good measure. And again, this is inside double quotes, so it shows up exactly as you see it on the screen. This is outside of quotes, so I want the contents of the variable guess. I want the 6 in this variable to show up on the output, and there's the 6. And our game is done. It is won. We are victorious in our very difficult game of guess a number between 1 and 10. There you have it. Now, this was a little more complicated program than I usually cover in the first lesson, but I wanted to show you A, how clean and direct Python is, and B, I wanted to show you you can use it to write simple games. And most importantly, I wanted to show you the indentation. It's pretty hard to show you the importance of indentation without indented code. So I tried to think of a programming example that would require some indentation, but still be fairly simple and straightforward. I think I got it. I hope you like this. Pay attention to your indentation as you move forward in Python, and all will go well. It really is that simple. That's what I like most about Python. Once you get the indentation right, the code is right. That's it for a quick first lesson. Thank you and good night.